And joining me now, Nayyera Haq, former State Department senior advisor, and Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu, who's a member of the House Judiciary and Foreign Affairs Committee. And Congressman, I'll start with you. This memo has been long in the waiting. A lot of it is redacted. If people take a look at it, a lot of the stuff is blacked out. But what are your key takeaways from what was released by the Minority Report?
Thank you, Joy, for your question. Any rational person that has read the Nunes memo and the Democratic response can only conclude that Chairman Nunes was trying to mislead the American people. Let me highlight 3 points from the Schiff memo. First, there was ample probable cause to execute a search warrant on Carter Page derived from multiple independent sources. Second, the memo lays out that the Russians were actively courting Trump campaign officials such as Carter Page and George Papadopoulos. And third, they were telling these Trump campaign officials these Russians had information that they were going to disclose about Hillary Clinton's emails. This in no way vindicates Donald Trump. In fact, it makes Donald Trump and his campaign look like they were in a much more suspicious kind of activity. And that's why the Trump campaign is scared and Donald Trump is scared, and he issued a series of bizarre tweets yesterday.
And there's also this White House response, Nayyera. This is what the White House had to say. While the Democrats' memorandum attempts to undercut the president politically, the president supported its release in the interest of transparency. Nevertheless, this politically driven document fails to answer serious questions raised by the majority's memorandum about the use of partisan opposition research from one candidate loaded with uncorroborated allegations as a basis to ask a court to approve surveillance of a former associate of another candidate that had a presidential campaign, etc. That's Sarah Huckabee Sanders. But Nayyera, what's very clear on page one of the memo is that the FBI's decision to initiate its counterintelligence investigation started in July of 2016, but that the actual surveillance of Carter Page didn't happen until he had left the Trump campaign. It happened in, after he was already gone in September. But that the important middle point was that Page approached the Trump campaign and joined it, having already been known to the FBI as somebody that Russia had taken an interest in. So would you imagine that an FBI that failed to take note of that somebody who they had had a history with and that they had previously flagged as someone Russia was taking an interest in, when that person then joins up and becomes an advisor to a presidential campaign, wouldn't it have been derelict of the FBI not to continue to notice that?
Absolutely. It would have been derelict, for example, also for the CIA to not have launched a counter operation and to investigate how this is part of a broader Kremlin and Putin strategy to undermine not just the United States, but democracy around the world. In fact, that is what the CIA did at the time. And towards the tail end of the campaign and the Obama administration, all of the intel we had gathered caused the United States to kick out several Russian operatives, shut down their facilities here, and in fact, tie this all back to what Russia was doing in the Ukraine. Russia had invaded another country, like physically invaded another country, and as part of that, had also worked with Paul Manafort. At the same time as they had a physical military operation, they've been conducting a hybrid cyber intelligence operation on as well. In that cyber intelligence operation, a big part of that, as we know, is the fake news social media accounts. And then, of course, the third prong was sending people like Carter Page and Paul Manafort in to try to undermine and take over a presidential election.
And, David, one of the things that has been the most confounding for me in this whole, contretemps has been the consistent demonization of Christopher Steele, who is a former MI6 agent from our very closest ally in the world, Great Britain, and the defense of Carter Page, the idea that it was somehow completely out of bounds for the FBI to surveil him, even though he was already known to have been playing footsie potentially with, or at least being recruited by the Russians.
Right. Well, there's obviously a synapse missing in Carter Page's head. I don't think that that's a hill you want to defend. But it is worth stating that Page and Papadopoulos were pretty low-ranking actors. Manafort, Gates, and Michael Flynn were not. And when you add all of them together, I mean, I'm sure Page and Papadopoulos never got that close to the center of the Trump operation, but Manafort, Gates, and Flynn were the center. This is the most foreign intelligence penetrated campaign for president since Henry Wallace in 1948, when the Soviets had intelligence operatives inside his third-rank campaign for president. This is one of the two major parties. And I think the Nunes memo is already receding in the past. You didn't need the minority memo to know how clownish the Nunes memo was. It was unconvincing on its face. It was, and Nunes's own antics are a complete derogation from what a chairman of the House Intelligence Committee should do. But in front of us is this giant indictment of Manafort and Gates for owing tens of millions of dollars to people you really don't want to owe money to, and massive financial crimes. And there they were at the center, controlling an American presidential campaign.
Well, and Congressman Lieu, that is, I think the salient point here is that it seems, from just looking at it, what we know now, that the Trump campaign was just a movable feast for intelligence operators allied to the Kremlin, who could send people at all points from the top to the bottom to sort of try to find points of penetration, and they kept finding them. That's very difficult, I would say, for the White House to defend.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to look at this Democratic memo in context. As we say here today, the president has still not implemented the bipartisan congressional sanctions on Russia passed over 6 months ago. As we say here today, the president still has refused to condemn the Kremlin for their attack on us in 2016. And the president still has not told his FBI and other agencies to prevent another attack on our democracy. And that is all very suspicious. And all this has to be viewed in context, along with Robert Mueller's continuing indictments and guilty pleas.
And meanwhile, Naira, you have a Republican Party in the House Intelligence Committee where the majority is more concerned with dying on the hill of Carter Page and defending him and attacking the dossier than they are in pushing the White House to implement those sanctions and to take some interest, some action against Russia for interfering in our election.
And this is, again, not the only place that Russia has done this. So this is up to Republicans in Congress to stand up for American democracy and the ideals and values that America is supposed to represent around the world. The United States stood up in favor of Ukraine. I mention Ukraine because Paul Manafort was the lobbyist and advisor for the Kremlin-backed person who was trying to allow Russia to take over the country. That same person who tried to allow Russia to take over another country was running a presidential campaign here in the United States. That is what ultimately the FISA warrant and this Mueller investigation are trying to get to the heart of, which is how much has a foreign government influenced American democracy. And the Republican leadership right now is failing to stand